What's up, everybody? Tony here with Urban Survivalcraft. I've had a lot of questions on the subject, so today we're going to be talking about machetes, machete skills, safety, and lore. Okay, so while I love a wide variety of cutting tools for a variety of environments, and I love my axes for sure, axes, tomahawks, hatchets, they're great, and this is one of my preferred ones, the Cold Steel Trailhawk. For the environments that I'm in when I go into the backcountry, I can't think of a better tool than the machete. And that's why, really, while we're talking about it, that's the one that I have the most expertise with. For me, going into the backwoods is generally either Big Cypress or the Everglades, although I've traveled throughout Latin America and Mexico. So the machete is one that's very near and dear to my heart. Let's start our conversation with unsheathing. If the machete is hanging off my belt, this is really the best way to have it because the sheath is readily available. So for safety reasons, when not in use, I just put it back in the sheath. Simple as that. You know, unsnap the little retention device, draw it, use it, and replace it. And you're done. Now, if it's not hanging off your belt, maybe we're traveling by some sort of conveyance, an ATV, an e-bike, or a horse even, and it's not hanging off my belt for comfort, maybe on my backpack, maybe in some other, and I need to reach for it, I want to reach for it without my fingers wrapping around the edge side. And the reason for that is, with these nylon sheaths, if there is an integrity issue and it cuts through the sheath, I want to make sure that my fingers are safe. Or if it's a leather sheath, like this one here, they may experience rot in humid environments. So for that reason, we don't want to grab it from the bottom while drawing. We want to kind of grab it from the backside or the opposite to the edge side. That way, when you're drawing it, it's a safer way to do it. Now, if there is no sheath available, and I've seen this happen a lot of times, what you don't want to do is you don't want to be careless with this. You certainly don't want to be walking around with it where it's just moving about, where you can injure yourself or somebody else accidentally. The technique here now is to lay it across your forearm in this manner, and now you have complete control. And this is an important way to do it. It's a safe way to do it, and the lore behind this is very neat. When we were studying Haitian machete fighting with our mentor Olivier, he was telling us that over there they instruct young men to hold it this way, not just because it's safe, but because it allows quick access should you need it quickly. And by appealing to a young man's warrior instinct, you're ingraining a safety lesson in a way that's hard to forget. So in this fashion, when it's not in use, if you don't have a sheath, rather than chopping it into a stump or worse yet, stabbing it into the dirt. I mean, stabbing it into the dirt exposes it to rocks and roots and whatever's underneath and can damage the tip of your blade. I would never do that. I mean, unless I was trying to break up a storm, but that's a conversation for another time. Now, if it's already in use and I need to hand it to somebody, I can hand it this way. Notice that the blade is pointed to the outside of me. Similarly, if I have to hand it to somebody from this position, I'm handing it that way where the blade is away from me. And that's another one that gets transmitted through lore very effectively. I don't want the blade pointed back at me when I'm handing it to somebody, because if that person has malicious intent, he can push it into me. So when I'm handing it out, the blade should be on the outside of my body. And again, you see how lore is a really good way to impart powerful lessons in almost an allegorical fashion. So here you have a couple of quick tips on safety and lore that are very apropos for our conversation here. Now, when we're using it, there's a couple of ways to use it. There's actually a lot of ways to use it, but the two that I'm going to discuss are the simple snap cut, which happens mostly with these two, with the finger and the thumb, in this fashion. This is a technique that you would probably use while you're limbing or chopping very thin saplings. In other words, things that are not particularly thick, where there's going to be a lot of friction, a lot of drag. For thicker items or for chopping, you'll be using the bottom 3 fingers, which will allow you a sturdier grip and allow you to drag and draw through the material. So if you're chopping something or if you're cutting through a broader thing like a bush or a briar, these bottom 3 fingers are going to be a lot more useful. So you have the pinch grip with these 2 fingers that allows for snap cutting, which you'll be using while you're limbing, and you'll have these 3 that you'll use when you're chopping or slicing through larger, broader materials. And one final thought, and I learned this from a Jamaican gentleman that used to work for my uncle. He was his landscaper. When I was a young man, or really a kid, I was probably about 9 or 10 years old, I took my uncle's machete and I was doing my best Don Quixoteing his bushes when he noticed me and came running out, and he's like, "Oh, come on, very dangerous what you're doing." And he taught me a very important lesson. And the way that he imparted it was very, very cool. He told me, you should cut away from yourself. Away from yourself. Never like this where you can cut your legs by accident. Away from yourself. And this is the angle that he used. And when he used this angle and he demonstrated it, we did it on some tall grasses that were growing on the far end of my uncle's property. And the neat thing about cutting in this fashion is that the cut grass would fall in a vertical orientation. And that's when he asked me to step back. He says, "Come here, come here. You see that grass? It hardly looks like anybody's been through there." And it really did. It looked really neat because when you chop this way, you have stuff that's folded over and crushed and bent over, where it's very obvious that somebody had been chopping. In this instance, it was very neat. It looked like the grass was supposed to be that way. And that's when he said, "This is something important in case they're after you." And when he said it that way, it struck a part of my soul that will never allow me to forget that lesson. So there you have another example of how very important lessons could be passed on using lore. Because inevitably we're gonna be asked questions about machete fighting, I thought I'd speak a little bit about how this may be used in a defensive fashion. Understand that a machete is not a small sword. It's a large knife. And as such, it's really, if you ever use this as a defensive tool, it's an improvised weapon. It's an improvised weapon. It's not a sword. And it has certain nuances about it that need to be respected when in use. First of all, understand that the blade is very thin and very flexible. And for that reason, you want to avoid, whenever possible, any edge-to-edge contact. Okay, 2 edges biting into each other will more often than not damage the blade. But in the case of machetes, and because they're so thin, edge-to-edge biting might cause it to break, and that's a problem. So you want to avoid that at all costs. So whenever you're defending, the optimal way to defend is to avoid the cut. If you have to parry it, then it's best to parry it on the outside using the flat of the blade. You're going to want to avoid this edge-to-edge type contact, preferring using the flat to do what some may refer to as a beat parry. I refer to it as spanking the blade out of the way. Also, the spine of the blade shouldn't be used either. Unlike a Bowie knife, and here we have a Cold Steel Trailmaster, if you'll notice, it's a lot thicker. With a blade like this one, you can use the spine to parry other blades. I wouldn't do that with a machete because it is thin enough that while attempting to do that, you might still get biting and still suffer from the same problems that biting creates. And incidentally, for that reason, I do not prefer machetes that have sawbacks on them. While it may seem like it's convenient, they're awfully dangerous because while you're sawing, you have the blade exposed to you. They're very uncomfortable. And sooner than later, you're going to break it, more than likely at the point of percussion. Okay, because the integrity of the blade, once you add the saw teeth to it, has already been compromised. So for that reason, I don't prefer the sawback machetes. So there you have it, folks. If you like what we're doing, if you found this information useful, please feel free to give us a like, a share, or even better, a subscription. Hit the notification bell also so that you're always informed. If you have any questions, concerns, or comments, drop them below. Let me know your thoughts. And until next time, take care.